Professor. I'd like an A in your class.
No problem. You got it.
Really? Just like that? It seems too easy.
Well, there's a contract.
A contract? I hope this isn't some Faustian exchange.
Not at all. A grading contract simply spells out exactly what you need to do in order to receive the grade that you want to earn.
What if I don't meet those expectations?
Part of the contract explains all of those details. How many assignments are needed for A-level work, whether you can revise and resubmit your assignments. All in the contract.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Professor. You're the best.
I know.
I really like this video in the sense that it does show how all the student needs to do is follow the stipulations of the contract, meaning completing a certain number of assignments on time, completing them according to the instructions, at least in my case. That's how I measure success. I'm James Savage. I'm a term assistant professor in the English department at George Mason.
Contract grading is a form of ungrading that involves creating a formal contract with the student that states, if you do X work, you will get Y grade. My name is Neil Silcox. I am a contract instructor in theater, working in the studio, mostly teaching acting and directing largely, though I do many other things as well. And I also work as an educational developer with the Maple League of Universities.
People actually use the term contract grading to describe a variety of different methods, but in general, they are all methods that allow students increased agency over the number and schedule of assignments that they submit. I'm Jessica Otis. I'm an assistant professor of history and director of public projects at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. I'm a digital historian and a cultural historian who specializes in the history of mathematics and early modern British history.
1785 is the year when we find the first example of grades being assigned at Yale, when President Ezra Stiles categorized 58 seniors into 4 different groups. These aren't grades in the way that we understand grades today, and Yale switched from using descriptive categories into a numeric system. Students were assessed by the faculty and given an overall score, with 4 being the highest and 0 being the lowest. These scores were recorded in a book of averages maintained by the institution. Yale's 4-point numeric scale is regarded as the precursor to the way GPA is calculated today. Other institutions through the 1830s used descriptive categories to grade their students and incorporated more than just the student's academic performance into the grade. According to an 1817 faculty report from William and Mary, they awarded their students categories based on their academic performance, personal conduct, and attendance. In 1897, Mount Holyoke implemented the letter grade system, using A through F for final grades in individual classes, becoming one of the first, if not the first, institutions of higher education in the United States to do so. The A through F scheme included an E as a passing grade, and the minimum passing score was 75. This grade scheme was revised multiple times over the first 10 years it was in use. The adoption of the Carnegie Unit in 1905 led to significant standardization across institutions. But it wasn't until after World War II that we see the massification of higher education. Even with the push for standardization, it took until 1970 for the letter grade scheme to reach an 80% adoption rate by post-secondary institutions. Since the beginning, grading has been problematic and the cause of significant stress for students and instructors alike. The Journal of Higher Education noted in 1964, "Grading is inevitable. It is at best inaccurate and unreliable."
When I present the grading contract to the students at the beginning of the semester, generally most of them won't have tried contract grading before. They're unfamiliar with it. It's new to them.
It initially caused more anxiety than I was thinking it would. And partly I think that I should have carved out more time to explain more fully how the whole process worked.
Students tend to be a little bit nervous when they hear about contract grading. They have a lot of questions. This is very new and unfamiliar to them. But by the time we get a couple of weeks into the semester, most of them have really come to appreciate the benefits that accrue to them from doing contract grading.
They generally accept it. Before, when I was teaching asynchronously during the pandemic, for example, I didn't negotiate the contract with them. I just told them, this is how we're going to do things. It's going to be a little different. Now I am negotiating the contract with them.
The negotiation process for the contract is pretty straightforward at the beginning of the semester. I set out the contract levels and they decide which ones they want to fill. So the only point that they have input at that stage of the contract is I ask them what are some alternate assignments that they'd be interested in doing if they start having trouble with the contract, and they brainstorm some of those assignments then. At the mid-semester, I check in with them and tell them how they're doing on their contract, and that's the point where we really start renegotiating, because I can identify at that point when students are getting into trouble with their goals. And sometimes it's as simple as saying, okay, I don't want an A in this class, I'm happy getting a B. Sometimes it's saying, I really can't do this type of assignment, and I'd like to do an alternate assignment, and we negotiate on what's a comparable level of effort.
Grading is pretty subjective, almost universally. And I work in a particularly subjective field, which is acting, creative arts in the studio. It had always chafed me that I would watch a performance that a student does of a monologue or a scene in class, for example, and that no matter how much I tried to slice and dice a rubric, it always ended up boiling down to, well, it feels like a B+,
And I think of linguistic justice as coming out of or trying to counter some of the injustices that are associated with language and with writing courses. In particular, this idea that there is a standard language that we all need to conform to. And when students don't conform to that standard language, then maybe their opportunities are not as great, their grades are not as high, they're discriminated against. Contract grading tries to level the playing field for everyone. It tries to encourage students to language and whatever ways that they want to speak the types of Englishes that they feel are appropriate for their audiences and for the writing projects that they're engaged in, without fear of penalty from the instructor.
Traditional grading schemes absolutely have their place, but I found that they weren't working well for me when I'm teaching digital history or interdisciplinary courses. In particular, I want to encourage students to experiment. And so contract grading for me is a way to decrease students' fears of being punished for trying something hard and failing to get it right. Contract grading basically provides me with a way for supporting the kinds of learning experiences that I want students to have in the classroom.
Most particularly in my field, I was interested in contract grading in order to unleash creativity in my students who are working in the acting studio.
Contract grading attempts to anyway put a pause on that and to say, let's think about our process. Let's not think about that final grade. Let's pretend this isn't a required course. Let's start with the idea that we all want to become better writers and readers, and that we're just going to practice. And so it tries to take the focus off that final product, off the final grade, and tries to put the focus on intrinsic motivation and on students practicing in an environment where they're free to take risks.
There probably is room for contract grading almost everywhere, though it would have to be really carefully formulated. There's no single contract that could serve in any given class, even in a second year versus a third year versus a fourth year acting class. I think that I would use very different contracts along the way.
My sense is that contract grading can work in many different contexts. It comes down to whether or not the instructor wants to focus on right and wrong, or whether they want to focus on the practice, or whether they want to focus on effort put forth or critical thinking. In many courses, even those in other fields outside of writing, can work with a model that focuses on practice.